Shri Kamala Shane Bajatara Charana Deko Shantamone Premonayani Aparupa Priya Darshana Aparupa Priya Darshana.
Aloha, namaste, Babaji.
Namaste, Anurag.
We are in our fourth conversation, and we had a wonderful session talking about the Guru and about Divine Mother, and we happen to be in the 6th day of Navaratri today, Divine Mother season, and we'll be celebrating Durga Puja this Saturday. I thought it would be a good time to talk about your book, The 10 Divine Articles of Sri Durga, which, looking at the publication date of 1996, it's the 20th anniversary.
Oh.
It was the beginning of, relative beginning of your teaching career.
And first book.
And the first book along.
Yeah.
I think you did a book on Kali at the same year.
Next year, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, wonderful meditations about the iconography of Sri Durga, and there are 10 aspects in this particular book that you've examined. Can you talk a little bit about how you came up with this, why this was one of your early works, and what this book meant to you?
Yeah, so at that age I was very fascinated in a good way with Divine Mother of the Universe. Of course, it became my path, and it probably already was my path because I had been initiated by Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, who was the last living devotee of Holy Mother, who was the wife and spiritual consort of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who was a devotee of Mother Kali. So that's kind of the way we connect everything back to Divine Mother of the Universe. We are Advaitists, as Holy Mother said, but we also bring in that special facet of Shakta. So there is a path in India called Shakta Advaita Vada. It's one of the 35, 40 paths that I've seen listed in the scriptures and the commentators. That means you're a non-dualist, but you recognize this essence in the subtle power in everything that moves and animates and is sentient, rather than like just prana that moves our hands and eyes, but a backdrop even to that. So we always then can use her as a matrix, if you will. In fact, some of my musical albums were called Music from the Matrix, long before that word got into vogue in Hollywood. And it means she's this grand intermediary and gives the reason and the meaning to the world of name and form and activity and karmas and everything. And when you can't go to Brahman or the Almighty Father or Allah, however you want to call the formless reality, for those kinds of things, you have to leave that pure and free of time, space, causation, name, form, movement, activity, karmas. That's something that you transcend when you get into that nirvana or nirvikalpa samadhi, as Buddha and Vedanta calls it. So Divine Mother was very important to me even early on like that, and was my path. When my teacher had me in initiation, was giving me mantra diksa, he asked me, what's your ideal? And I said, Divine Mother of the Universe. I hadn't really thought of it that much, but it was just sort of natural to me. So it was sort of fitting then that my early books were about, the first two were about Divine Mother specifically, and about her form. As I explained the iconography, as you say, or symbology of her appearance and the weapons of this warrior goddess, which is fitting for a time like this. I mean, we're in battle, against relativity, against Maya, even against convention and warlike behavior and things like that. The lovers of peace. Shanti, 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 peace on all levels. So when I had a chance to introduce to the West a deeper symbology around those things, I took it, and it came out in the form of this first book, The 10 Divine Articles of Sri Durga. And also the 10 arms that hold it, and the lion she rides upon, and the demon that the lion is crushing underfoot. I mean, so many things. The buffalo demon, Mahishasura it's called. It's such a beautiful symbology to actually, I think, fuel your meditations with God in form. Now, a lot of people sort of pass it over and just think, oh, I want to become Zen Buddhist, or I want to become a meditator on the light, formless light of consciousness. That's fine if you are afforded the ability to do that, and it would be better if you knew the kingdom of heaven within you as being many-faceted, and she being the progenitress and the subtle Shakti power behind all of that. You would then get to the father through the son, or get to the mother through the daughter, or get to Brahman through Shakti. So I wanted those kinds of ideas brought forth in terms of Divine Mother, and I saw a lot of people when I was with my dear compatriot and friend and Lex Hickson, who was really the main force behind this SRV associations. We've already mentioned him several times, I think, in the past 3 talks we've had. And he was just so naturally inclined towards mother worship, and we had a secret pact with each other early on, that we were doing the mother's work secretly and behind the scenes as she usually works. Because, let's look at it, of the major religions of the world, where is she? Except in India. In India, she has her own lineage, and she has her own scriptures, and she has her own votaries and worshippers by the thousands, and then a lot of beings who worship even Mother Reality outside of India in other forms, whether it be Mother Mary in Catholicism, or Isis in Egypt and so forth. You could go around and find Tara in Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, which I got initiated into early on too, green and white Tara. So seeing that, then you would be inclined to want to share this secret. Recently, I've looked through all 108 Upanishads again, because we usually study the 9 or 10 that Shankara commented on, and found out that if I totaled them all, there are 7 goddess Upanishads there, and that's in the Vedanta. Upanishad is Vedanta. I'm not talking about specifically yoga or Shaktism. So even in Vedanta there's this great love relationship with Divine Mother of the Universe, with these rishis, these ancient rishis that came out with the Upanishads, which is at a later era than the Vedic rishis. And she was there too, shooting through everything, as Ramakrishna said, like sweetness in sugarcane juice, just hidden. Anyway, at the end of each of these goddess Upanishads, you find this declaration: this is the secret doctrine, and she is the great secret. And that's so true when you look, as I just said, at the religions of the world and so forth, and not find Divine Mother Reality evinced or shown or revealed or spoken of or written about that much. So to bring it forward, the question, 10 articles of Durga with, as you know, because you've read the book, each have a symbology, like arrow, bow, spear, conch, discus, skull cup, so.
Yeah. Before we get into that, I remember somewhere in the preface you mentioned about having some objection to merely looking at her as like a nature spirit. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, that's what I mean. Because India has meditated so deeply upon her, they haven't seen her just as an earthly mother or as a goddess of planes of existence, or even just as a form. She has formless form. When we talk about how the eyes see and how the body moves and how food gets digested, we're talking about a sort of external form of her, a prana, as Jesus said, by which man does not live by bread alone. So there's this power in everything like that. Well, it's hard to suss out or find in objects, but there it is. And in fact, when I think the scientists find atomic particles and so forth, that's a part of her too. That's indication of her power and everything. Like, I was reading one of my gurus, Swami Shishananda's lectures recently, and he said he was talking to a scientist once, and the scientist pointed at the car, the Vedanta Society's car, and said, Swami, if you were to be able to gather all the power out of just the atoms in that car, you could blow up 2/3 of the world. So Swami Shishananda turned to him and said, what good would that do? So it shows the difference between the Western way of thinking, even if it isn't intentionally vicious or violent, it still courts that kind of idea. Let's gather power and let's use it for, like kids at, at 4th of July or something, let's just see the spectacle.
There's a very nice sentence or two in the preface which goes right to the heart of the symbology in terms of practice. I'd like to read this. It is up to each of us then to gaze upon these symbols, contemplate them, extract the meaning which they represent, implement this valuable information into our understanding, and meditate in unified fashion upon the Beloved One, who wields them endearingly with infinite care and perfect attachment. Beautiful. So, so I'd like to go through a few of the symbols, and maybe you can give you some of your reflections on it and how you've meditated upon this in your own life. So we could start with the bell and some of the words you have for it, or the insights, or clarity, attraction, repulsion, realization, and truth. So how have you used the bell how do you and how have you used the bell in terms of your own practice and understanding?
There's a meditation on it, which is included at the end of the book. As you say, there's a description of the symbology of it philosophically, and then how you use it in an actual meditation. I've had the experience of people, because they've come up afterwards and told me that if they were at a puja, say like a 10-article Durga Puja we're giving Saturday night here, and we gave in San Francisco last week, when the bell has gone off and their eyes closed and they're drinking in the puja in the atmosphere, that the bell has actually pierced through darkness and given them this immediate vision, as it were, of Shakti power in them. Mother has pierced through just that sound. So in that way, it's very practical and sort of very obvious right here on this. Now, if you go to this meaning of the bell, which is Sri Ramakrishna's favorite way of describing the word, Om, A-U-M, is the right way, philosophically correct way to spell that. A, waking state, U, dreaming state, M, deep sleep, and all sorts of other Triputi associations. Then you find that the sound is inherent in the bell, and it gets struck and comes out and then disappears, decays, as well. That's sort of creation, preservation, destruction. And she's said to hold those three in her two hands. And when the sound decays, then you could say the teaching is that people attached to samsara, who actually believe they're getting born, actually believe they live separate from God, and actually believe that they're dying when the body passes, they do decay into more cycles of rebirth. That's a good correlation. But those who realize, who just watch this threefold process as witness, as it were, realize that the sound is inherent in the bell and can be struck again and again and again, or it can be left alone.
What are you experiencing, like in puja, when you are ringing the bell? Are you visualizing this or experiencing that as what you just described?
Yes, I mean, it's an accompaniment to arati and to satsang and to puja. You're ringing that, you're waving incense maybe with the other hand, with the mriga mudra, the deer mudra, gentility and so forth. All these symbologies are there, and then as the bell is ringing, I think of it as awakening the power in the power of the deity in the image, because this isn't like some sort of idolatry or something that some other religions would be looking in on us and maybe criticizing that. It's worshiping the deity inside of behind the image, which is in the sound, basically. So the sound is very important. The sound that you're saying in mantra, and the sound that comes from the bell, the sound of teaching your student. I mean, there's a beautiful teaching that I've sort of put together myself. You start out with yantra. Yantra is position. You assume a position. And then you go to a teacher and get the teachings, which is mantra. Yantra, mantra. Then with that teaching you worship. That's yantra, mantra, tantra. See? And from yantra, mantra, tantra, you finally are able to make a conclusion about the nature of relativity and the nature of reality. That's Siddhanta. So you've got yantra, mantra, tantra, Siddhanta, and guess where it ends up? In Advaita Vedanta. So it's beautiful. Another 5 teaching that I've kind of put together when I've seen Vedanta, Tantra, Yoga, Buddhism, Sankhya, all these great darshanas are ways of clear seeing in India that sort of, is a kind of description of that whole process of the importance of sound. In our tradition there, 5 elements and 5 senses. The fifth and most subtle is hearing, and that goes with ether, which is the subtlest of all elements. Some people don't even know about ether yet, so they don't know about the kingdoms of heaven within, because those are ethers. 5 of them, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
So making these connections, it was made by Patanjali in yoga, and Vedavyas commented on it. I mean, Father Vedanta, Father in yoga concur on these things. So it's very deep and very connected.
Yeah. Let's do one more. The arrow, which you have here in the meditation, symbolizing accuracy, omnipresence, penetration, pervasiveness, impetus, meticulousness, unity. Any thoughts about that?
Who wrote that? Well, there's a similarity between the spear she holds and the arrow. They both penetrate. But the difference between them, to start off, would be that her arrow is, the penetration is done from a distance without her getting involved. If she has to take up the spear and kill a particular demon, particular ego, is what that symbolizes, to free you, then you'll be up close, and there won't be any doubt that you'll get penetrated in some way. You see, your ignorance will get penetrated, or you will penetrate through to the non-dual state of mind. However that works in any given aspirant's spiritual evolution and station. The arrow is done more from a distance. It's just like insight coming from afar, that you're not aware that it's connected to her necessarily. So that's one beautiful facet of meditating on her accoutrement, these beautiful 10 articles. And there's also 16 armed Durgas, and there's 8 armed Durgas, Ambaji, and so forth. Right now at Durga Puja in Navaratri, we call it 9 days and 9 nights worth of worship of her. Millions of souls, yes, most of them in India, but quite a few in other countries too, are worshipping her, and they're worshipping her in different names. Around India, the different provinces would call her by different names, Jagadatri or Ambaji, but it's all really this one great goddess. In her own scripture, she says Durga is the foremost of 5 goddesses. And when you say Durga, you're also inferring Kali, because Kali was born out of the third eye of Durga in a particularly nasty battle she had with a big ego. And so that's those are beautiful stories that go along with the symbologies of these articles.
I would think, practically speaking, I think the arrow would be, I notice when you're teaching, sometimes you're getting to a point, it's a little bit like doing a teaching of sending an arrow out.
Yes.
Would that be correct to say?
Yes, sure.
Yeah. Or any kind of project that you're doing? Or, reaching...
Yeah, I think on any level that I would say, one of the words is mentions a kind of foreknowledge or omniscience, that you really should think things out before you act. And it's maybe not a popular notion. People just throw themselves into action, and therefore they get karma. They may be in a restless mood or a slothful mood, and they force themselves to go into workplace and jobs and so forth. Or if you're a creative person, you go out there, and if you're doing that restlessly is when you get hurt or injured, say by saws or by nails and boards, things like that. But if the workman went out there with a preconceived vision of what he wanted to create, and step by step had memorized it, well, it's much like the puja. Before I go downstairs to do a puja, I will think it all through and enact it in my mind. Then I'll go downstairs with a much better grounding and make less mistakes in pronunciation and action, in order of things, and the whole thing will flow much better. Of course, she forgives our limitations and our shortcomings in these areas, but karma doesn't. She'll forgive, karma won't. Karma is how did Holy Mother put it? Inscrutable law. You have to pay for the karma of using this body to the last farthing, she said. Borrowed even an English word, from the English at that time. Didn't even use the word rupee or anna. So she was talking to us too, because we were projecting ourselves into huge areas of karma with lots of action and lots of repercussion was going to come from that, the whole world scene. So that kind of carefulness would be also inferred as
Yeah.
you're saying.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the phrase, that unless thine eye be single, that we need that perfect concentration.
There's even a sloka that we've memorized, taking that bow of scriptures provided by India and fitting to it the arrow of mind made sharpened by thoughts on reality alone, then release and penetrate the mark, the eternal Brahman.
Right.
So yeah, that's almost, I'd say it's an equivalent saying to Christianity's, if thine eye be single, you shall know the truth.
Yeah. It also reminds me of something you said about if you're not in a sattvic state, you really should not do any kind of action whatsoever. That kind of speaks to the clarity of the arrow. Can you think of a time about when did you start to try to master this, where you were less in the thrall of that kind of distraction, and what was it like to kind of manifest the arrow within yourself? Because we're all scattered as children, and we have to kind of gather that attention together again.
Yeah, Holy Mother, Shisharda Devi says, what's the use of doing anything without collectiveness of mind? Actually, you'll see that chart in that teaching Saturday morning here, live stream, in one of the classes. But without collectiveness of mind, she says, there's no use in doing anything. You're just going to have these failures or imperfect results coming back to ruin your work. So I think in my case, when I learned how to concentrate via music, that was it for me. I preferred that state of concentration, devoid of unsurety, devoid of doubt, devoid of all those things that plague most people well into their later life, maybe all their life. In my teens, it went away. Then it was just a matter of refining it. We have Ashtanga Yoga, right? Asta, Hasta, Avasta, I say. Asta means get a hold of the 8-limb yoga with Hasta, your hand. Asta, Hasta. And then by stages, Avasta, begin to work your way to perfection. So that's what I had to do after I learned the secret of concentration. In my way of thinking, for nowadays, people skip the first 2 limbs of yoga and go right to the 3rd and 4th, asana pranayama. So that's already a disadvantage. If they've mastered yama and niyama, 5 of each in a previous lifetime, I have no issue with it. Then they try for pratyahara maybe, and they fall down because they can't control their minds thinking about objects, both outer and inner. Because once you control the outer object, you have to turn to the inner and get samadhi of that too. After that is dharana, concentration, and you see so few people with it, especially in the spiritual sense. There are people, successful people, who have mastered dharana to a certain extent in their occupations, in their jobs. And they're the more happy people, no doubt. But when it comes to spiritual life, it's extremely important to learn that art of concentration so that your happiness will not all of a sudden get threatened by unhappiness. Your success will not get waylaid by failures. You will not get waylaid. You'll stay, in the ability to concentrate again, even in the midst of failure, and those are the people who can pull themselves up by their bootstraps, and the others fall into this ocean of suffering.
So you think you inadvertently were practicing yoga as a musician, like learning,
Oh yes.
practicing 8 hours a day or whatever?
Especially, as I say, the concentration.
Yeah.
And that was in my teens. And then when I reached 20 and I 1920, I left home, then I was immediately on the yogic trail and the thread again. I paid my debt to family and society, and I was really look back on that whole period and see that I became vegetarian right away. I did never like eating meat. And I started doing meditation. I began to hear about gurus and entertained some of them in my mind. A whole host of things came forward.
You were also doing a lot of surfing when you moved to Hawaii. Was that, I would imagine that has a great deal of concentration and flowing with events.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
and
literally.
And great beauty in it.
Yeah.
I wasn't out there to compete or to just enjoy the aesthetic scenery either. I mean, it was beautiful, but every time a wave came at me and the offshore winds that the surfers were there, it was like a mother with a veil coming towards me. I mean, I actually thought these things in my 20s. And had the full experience of water. You know, later then I could concentrate on water in meditation. I knew what water was. I was friendly with it. I was somewhat masterful in it. See, so I mean, this is connecting your life, and sometimes it's not conscious connection, but if you look back on your life, you see that you were headed towards these conscious connections, and it behooves you very much now to make them in full in your spiritual practice. Air, earth, fire, water, ether, connect those to the five senses of hearing, tasting, touching, seeing, and smelling, and know that all of them have come out in some sort of sancharaha, prati sancharaha, as Kapila says. There's been a chain of evolution out, and there must be a return chain evolution in involution. Evolution, involution. We're missing the involution part, so it's very difficult for us to understand what's beyond both evolution and involution. And she will show us if we follow.
I would imagine, getting back to surfing for a moment, that it's like karma in a way. It's like you can't, if you are
Shall
not,
I show you my
if you are
surfing
not
scars here?
if you're not present, you lose it. It really, I don't think it's a stretch to say it's a great practice in concentration. You're in the midst of all this change, you have to stay focused.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, very much so.
You've talked about reading the riptides and
Right. It's a beautiful saying. In fact, we've been using lately that the Zen masters have used, that you should study the changes of your mind's awareness and consciousness just like an Eskimo would study the changes in snow conditions day by day, because his very life depends upon it, little subtleties that he's seeing. So the same way with that, changes in your consciousness as you practice pratyahara and dharana, and then get into meditation, more ready for that. Would be connections already made. And one of the teachings I like that's come up recently, and it's very, very under the surface most of the time, is that people are expecting to get experiences out of meditation. And I'm constantly telling them, nothing's going to happen. They don't like that, I said, the effects of your meditation you'll see in your life. And that's how to think of that. Just sit. No matter what happens or doesn't happen, if nothing happens, it's probably better. But then meditation will then flavor your life. You'll bring out certain things you need to work on. It'll give you certain boons and blessings you've been waiting for. Rain cloud of virtues will come sailing in, unexpected, unbeknownst to you. Shower its grace upon you. I mean, that's all just keeping up a daily practice meditation without fail. 365 days in a year, you do 365 meditations. Hopefully 730, twice a day.
Yeah. We did have a wonderful conversation about the guru principle, and I'd like to shift a little bit towards that. And I'd like to read a little small section from the Sri Sharada Vijnana Gita, which is a great book that we put out in SRV and is now an audio book.
Wonderful.
Will be available on Audible shortly. Here's a nice couple of lines. You will play a true role of a son only if you can help your mother acquire the means for her higher evolution in the hereafter. Now I bring this up because you had the remarkable experience of initiating your mother and becoming, you actually fulfilled this teaching by Holy Mother, and that you initiated her, became her guru and her spiritual preceptor. Can you talk about how your relationship evolved with that and to culminate in that great blessing?
Yes, it was my great privilege to be able to do that, and it was to her credit that she was able, later on in her life, to recognize Sri Ramakrishna. I mean, we feel like it's not us that are giving the mantra, that is teachers in the Ramakrishna order. It's Holy Mother or Sri Ramakrishna that's giving the mantra through us, and we keep that sacrosanct. And so in that case, she recognized, to a certain extent, the divinity of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa. However, it was interesting because she loved the formless really more. And she hadn't ever gotten attracted to Christianity. She'd actually gotten scared away from it when she was a 8-year-old child. Her grandfather and grandmother took her to church, and there was hell and brimstone preachers, and she said, that's not what I believe. And she took that through her whole life. So she would still go to church like once a year with my aunt on Sunday, but she was a karma yogini. She just served everyone. She was good and helpful to everyone, and even experienced the passing of 2 of her sons and her husband in the interim. So at some point in there, I shared with her my own love of Sri Ramakrishna and shared the gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. I used to take long trips from Hawaii to San Francisco to Billings, Montana, rent a car and drive to Powell, Wyoming. It's this little podunk town out by Cody, just so I could sit there and read the gospel to my mother and my grandmother in their old age. And then I would make them dinners, and if it was winter, I'd shuffle the snow off the sidewalk, so I remember those days very well, and the reactions I would get from them when they heard these teachings from India. Oh my, isn't that interesting? Things like that, And I'd try to explain things, and well, my mother took it very deeply. It was a little bit late for my grandmother, but she eventually said she wanted a mantra, and I gave her one, and I gave her a name. This brought us even closer together, and because I was very close to my mother young. When I got older, I started feeling like she's a little bit too attached to me. I'd like to be free, that kind of thing. So I went to Hawaii, not just to get away from her, of course, but kept relations with her all the time. And then she evinced this interest in the path I was in. It's just very interesting. I mean, she was, as I said, sort of left fallow ground because she didn't get indoctrinated or accept the untenable assumptions of fundamentalist Christianity. I mean, there's beautiful Christianity out there, but there's also some very unacceptable things they're teaching that are being taught to people, which are unnecessary. So she was easily filtering those out. And then when she heard these teachings and me talking about them and started to come to my classes once in a while, she really got interested. So it's a very beautiful thing that I am so grateful for in my life, that I was able to do that. My dad was long past, and he was atheist, and I wouldn't have been able to talk with him about these things. I would have scoffed at them.
Yeah.
He was more scientific.
That's beautiful. I've heard the term Satguru, and you've told some wonderful stories about Swami Sheshananda, who was your Satguru, and I'm sure there are many more stories to tell. Then I've also heard the term Upaguru, which is translated sort of as a guru, a teacher along the way. It's not really your main guru, but it's even said our mother is our first guru.
Yes, right.
Can you talk about some other of your Upagurus? I mean, you've talked a little bit about Lex, who of course is probably one of your significant relationships.
At least a mentor. I mean, he was almost 10 years my senior, and I was in my 20s. He was in his 30s. So, yes, he was definitely an Upaguru or a mentor. And I think could have been my guru, although our ages were relatively close, and we were better as co-workers and compatriots, I think, than we were as reenacting a guru-shishya relationship. But, of course, he had more experience, so he introduced me to the Swamis of Ramakrishna Order. That was huge, as they say.
Yeah.
Because you meet those kinds of souls, whether you vibrate with monasticism or not, it's just adds so much to anyone's spiritual life, even by contact. But to speak of if you get into how deeply knowledgeable and even illumined some of these souls are. So Upagurus, none of them inform really. Yes, I could say my mother was also an early teacher of mine, my father too. I mean, he was the one that made me become a musician, and that's how I learned to concentrate. So I'm not discluding atheists from the whole fold, and sometimes they make the best disciples when they have an inner experience. Swami Vivekananda liked them very much, to a point. So, what was I saying? So,
what was the circumstances of your very first meeting with Lex?
Very first meeting was in Hawaii. I had moved there. I was in my 20s, and I had made all these changes like vegetarianism and practice of yoga and so forth. Yoga, what I mean by yoga is not just hatha, but the whole eight limbs. And he was doing, in his early days of doing In the Spirit on WBAI radio in New York, where he lived. He had a house there. And later on, funny 30 years later, I was actually given these tapes by him of the WBI programs to be able to put them all into 360 or so titles, 330 titles of him interviewing everyone who was anyone controversial or authentic or not. I mean, in this sweep of interviews he did from the 70s through the 90s. So he was in the beginning of that when I met him, and he was actually in Hawaii to speak on a radio station, and that's how I met him, through a friend who was gone to see him at one of these after functions of a radio show. And she told me about him, so I met him, and then he was married to Sheila Hickson, or Sheila Rice, actually, of the Rice family on Maui. So there was a wonderful family there, and so he often went to Maui to stay at their house on the slopes of Haleakala. And so I went immediately over there, and we sat together. The first meditation together was just unbelievable, really. It was rather unbelievable in what happened. I'm not a sensationalist, and nor do I read a lot into emotionalism or sentimentalism. I think those are better left out of the picture for the most part. But there was really some truly remarkable things that happened when I meditated with him in the early days. Then I went to New York and stayed in his house on the Hudson and did the same. We'd meditate together. You know, this is something that happened maybe 3-4 times a year we'd get together, so it wasn't like we were with each other all the time, but we developed a very close relationship, and I saw him as an illumined Westerner, one of the few I think I would place that title on, really truly illumined. And of course he had been at Columbia University and writing his dissertation on Gaudapada Karika, and knew a lot of Sanskrit, and had met Swami Nikhilananda in New York at the Vedanta Society there and become his teacher, his disciple for 7 years before he had started into this radio shows and traveling. So it was just this, a lot of many connections that we're looking back upon, just seeing again as if Divine Mother were just, had pre-planned this and was just routing us together back to this center.
I'd never heard this particular radio program, but you told me there was one in the Spirit program where he was talking about meeting you and some other people. He seemed to have been moved as well by his meeting with you.
Yeah, and at that time, not long after that, I was married to my wife finally, and he loved us very much, and he would have us meet him, or sometimes we would then meet together. I'd fly from Hawaii, he'd fly from New York. I might have said this on this program already, on these programs, but we would meet at Portland with Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj and put ourselves under his fiery gaze and be purified and see him do puja and listen to his Advaita Vedanta lectures, and it's an amazing soul.
Yeah. Even after meeting Swami Sheshananda, you've had some really wonderful meetings with other swamis. Like maybe you could talk about Swami Nityaswarupananda.
Oh my, yes. I was very fortunate to meet and have concourse with, even darshan, I would say, with both Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, my own guru, and Swami Nityaswarupananda. Saying that he's an upaguru might be, not giving enough credit, but he was also in his 90s when he passed away, and he passed away before Swami Sheshanandaji Maharaj, and he was also a living disciple, initiated disciple of Holy Mother. Those two are the last monastic ones we see of that cross-section of swamis that had seen her, because she lived a lot longer than Sri Ramakrishna did in the body. And Swami Nityaswarupananda was a totally different personality than Swami Sheshananda, and wasn't the disciplinarian so much on the outside. And he had started the Ramakrishna Institute Mission of Culture, Gold Park, we call it, there in Gold Park in Calcutta, and had all of these people from Europe and other places coming together in the Vedanta. It was beautiful what he did. And the Ramakrishna order, was behind him in it. So he was a wonderful soul, and gave me advice almost without me even knowing it. We were just very natural in our conversations, but he would give guidance that you would recognize as guidance.
In hindsight, what do you see of some of the advice he's given you? One example, perhaps?
When I think of Swami Nityaswarupananda, I think of a kind of sharp-edged discrimination that was critical of his own order, like Ramakrishna order. He wrote a book, by the way, called Back to Vivekananda, where he was stating that things had moved away from Vivekananda's original intention for the monks. So it was kind of controversial and didn't get printed by the order. But that was the kind of person he was. He was just sort of free of any kind of assumptions or overlays. For instance, when I think of him, I think of the Ashtavakra Samhita that he translated. His version of it, beautiful. I mean, very sparse commentary through most of them, because that's the way Advaita Vedanta probably should be left. But that was kind of a holy Bible of Vedanta for me early on. He gave me a copy and signed it, and so I was like, so things like that.
Yeah.
Very Advaitic and very understated, but was this the sheathed sword? I think Swami Sheshananda was an unsheathed sword, and Nityaswarupananda was a sheathed sword.
As you're talking, I'm remembering now a teaching from him that came through you, where you told me he was sitting down in Greenville ashram, SRV ashram in Greenville, and pointed to a photo of Sri Ramakrishna and said, "That's the first time God has been photographed." Yeah. I'm thinking back on it now. That did have a profound effect on me to think about.
Yes, me too.
Yeah.
We were just sitting there. It was like natural to be with him, and of course, we've had this spiritual arts ensemble called Jaima Music through the 70s, 80s, and 90s that was touring long before the kirtan wallas and people nowadays are doing it. We were doing bhajan and stotram, not kirtan, but we went from place to place, and so we went to the SRV National, which is in Greenville, New York, and still a beautiful temple there, run by a Swami. And when we were there, he just heard Jaima music and loved what we were doing, taking the Indian music and putting it into something understandable and amenable to Western sensibilities and ears, and doing teachings at the same time with the music. It was very effective. So we were sitting there one day, and he just, silence came, and we were both all right with that. And then he was looking around. He said, "See that picture of Sri Ramakrishna on the wall there in his traditional yogic stance?" Because there are 3, maybe 4 pictures of Ramakrishna in existence. And I said, "Yes, Swami." He said, "That's the first time God was ever photographed." And we all know that particular picture shows him in a very high state of samadhi. There's another picture that shows him in a very high state of bliss, the bliss of Brahman. We call that Brahmananda. But there was of course there were so many different states that he experienced, spiritually speaking. He was a copious map of samadhis. That's one of the main things, facets of his incarnation. Bringing the Divine Mother out from hiding, Mother Kali, and then having all these samadhis as if it were the most natural thing to do, that you should do it too. And the universality of all religions, things like that are attributed to his main facets of his advent. But yeah, that was a very beautiful experience. So a soul like that can just speak one sentence, and it'll stick with you for a long time and have ramifications for your future spiritual growth. You need to contemplate these over time.
Yes. You've also had a relationship with Swami Damodarananda in Fiji.
Oh, yes. Yes. He was a wonderful soul. When I first met him, he reminded me of Gandhi so much, so I was immediately interested in him. He came to the Vedanta Society of Hawaii, which is a sub-center of the Seattle Center, run at that time by Swami Bhaskarananda, who's still alive in Seattle. And I had a good relationship with him. And so he was invited, that is Swami Damodarananda was coming through Fiji, stepped on Hawaii, the footstep, and then went to the mainland. So I saw him on his way back, and he said, we got to talking and had a good affinity, so he said, come to Fiji. So not long after that, I made the reservations and went to Fiji, and the first of 2 visits. And first in Fiji, at the ashram there, he, late 20s, early 30s, he took me aside and said, you're going to learn how to do traditional Hindu worship. And immediately, I remember, as we're saying stories here, he took me outside that first morning. He had his cane. He was, his legs would later give out, and he was the Swami that just recently offered himself into the Ganges River, put aside his crutches and just offered his body. And it's one of the 4 ways in which a monk can give up the body in India. So it was an amazing thing. We even have it on footage, that you can see him 3 in the morning when nobody would bother him, head for the river and give up his body. Well, anyway, backstepping 30, 40 years from that in Fiji, he took me out with his cane. I had to make this mention because the cane's important to the next part. And we were walking around in the gardens outside the Fiji Vedanta Society, or actually it's not called Vedanta Society, but that Ramakrishna ashram. And he was looking at flowers to offer to Divine Mother and to the divinities inside on the altar. I mean, a typical Ramakrishna Vedanta altar has Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, and Swamiji as the centerpiece, and has Christ and Buddha as side pieces, and has Mother Durga and Mother Kali as centerpieces along with. And maybe has Ganesha, Shiva, and so forth, Krishna and Ram. So we were outside looking at the flowers, and he's short and I'm tall. So I probably had this in mind, but this man can help me. So we're out there, and he pointed with his cane to a flower. I said, that one would be perfect. Pick that one. So I reached up really high and picked it. And just out of habit, stupid me, began to take this flower to my nose. And immediately raised his cane and tapped me on the hand. And said, we do not enjoy these flowers for ourselves, for our ego. These are to offer to the divinities represented in the images. Yeah. And I immediately understood that. That was like all that was needed for me to check myself against the usual habits we have that are so irrespectful of deifying things. Tantra is all about deifying objects. My teacher, Swami Sheshananda, who was much more known for Advaita Vedanta than he was for Tantra, used to say that renunciation is not condemnation, it's deification. So, even in the Ramakrishna Order Swamis, they're thinking that this, even though this world is unreal and it's Maya and it's full of suffering, it's also Brahman. So this is one thing you have to tackle in your mind when you see them and learn from them. It's this sort of dichotomy that's existing there. How are they calling a world unreal but still living in it and seeing Brahman? It's like seeing through other dimensions. So anyway, that was a beautiful story you recall to my mind.
That's a powerful teaching, because I've taken that in, hearing it from you, and I've talked to other people about it. Getting back to the bell, it's like that's how the penetrating power of the bell, a pure teaching like that just reverberates.
And again, back to the car that has the ability, if you channel its power, to blow up 3/4 of the world. Why are you thinking that way?
Yeah.
Here's a little tiny bell that has the power to split the curtain of Maya in your own mind and give you enlightenment. If you use it right, treat it right.
Yeah.
It's just totally, it's peace, 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 rather than power, power, power.
Yeah. It makes you so grateful to think about having these teachings, that you're actually starting to break the curtain of Maya, rather.
Yes, and thank God for it too.
Thank God.
Because in a society like this, it's pervasive and thick.
Yeah.
A curtain of nescience type thick, they call it.
Yeah. So you've also had dealings with some of the Swamis in India, I think.
Many.
Yeah. Who was the publishing Swami? I think Swami.
Swami Bodhisarananda Ji Maharaj is now, I think, one of the assistant vice presidents, if I'm correct at this point. He was vice president of Advaita Ashrama, and Swami Mumukshananda Ji Maharaj was the president, I think he's still alive, but very old.
Right.
They transferred him to Udbodhan, which is Holy Mother's house, and he presided over that. I had additional great experiences with him I can't describe him here, I might break into tears.
Go ahead.
But back to Swami Bodhisattvanandaji, he was the vice president of the Advaita Ashram, which is this publishing arm of Ramakrishna order, which is pretty much sticking to main scriptures, revealed scriptures, non-dual scriptures, Advaita Vedanta, and put out so many great books even before Mumukshananda and Bodhisattvananda were in charge of it. So, and then Advaita Ashrama has a separate and very rarefied and unknown center called Mayavati up in the Himalayas, where Swamiji walked in the winter and found this land, and eventually Captain and Mrs. Sevier, these Western disciples, came and helped him buy it and start it, and other Swamis came to follow. These two great English souls gave up their bodies there, I think, one of them at least, not both. And so there's a big history around that. But these two, one in Calcutta in the midst of the city, you know how Calcutta is if you've been there, and then one's in this peaceful, pastoral Himalayan paradise, called Mayavati. So I saw him in both those locations through the years, and he also took a look at some of the teaching charts I was making and gave me suggestions, and even entertained the thought of putting out some of my books. And the Ramakrishna Order is pretty much not putting out books by English people or American people until after maybe they pass away, like Christopher Sherwood or Sister Nivedita and so forth. So anyway, that was something that might have happened and still could. But yes, that was a good connection with him. There are several Swamis I could mention like that.
Anybody else that I've missed so far?
I mentioned Swami Mumukshanandaji Maharaj and Swami Muktidananda down south. At least he was there at the time. And Swami Gokulananda in Delhi was very friendly to me. This is before Swami Shantakvananda, who's now there, and we have a good relationship too. He was in charge of the Delhi Center and was a very wonderful Swami. In fact, when he passed away, they had a huge viewing of his body in state outside the temples, and many people came. He had many people in Delhi were very devoted to him. And then there's a Swami, at the time I met him in Chandigarh, India, Swami Brahmeshanandaji Maharaj, who was very close with me. I mean, the thing that impressed me most all about him, I think, was just this lack of any barrier between us. Like, I'm a Hindu, you're an American, I'm a monk, you're a Vanaprasthan. Whatever the barrier was there, was just not there. It's just like having an older brother or a father. Swami Bhaskarananda up in Seattle, also. Swami Swahananda down in California. It's not just in India, but I met all the Swamis in the West when I was touring with Jaima Music, and some of them even had me talk, like Swami Shraddhananda in Sacramento. And some of them had me come and play Jaima Music concerts there at their centers. Ramakrishna birthday in LA, for instance. Swami Swahananda was always interested in us, in SRV and in myself. So yes, I could go on. You're perking the old memory. But these are, all monastic people, and they're Indians. It's funny you mentioned my mother and how I gave the teaching to her later in life. Back in my teens, when I was going into college, I had to pick a language. And there was all the usual languages there, but there was a Sanskrit teacher in Portland State at that time. And I selected that, even though I didn't really know. It just appealed to me. And my mother and father said, no, you don't pick another one. You don't want that one. That's a dead language. Well, that was eventually the most living language ever that I discovered, used by so many luminaries to write scriptures and revelations down and so forth. But that's sort of an aside to this main point, is that at that time my mother also made the statement, because I must have been interested in it, said, oh, monks, they're rather selfish beings. You don't want to entertain them. So I found that not to be the case and had to tell her so. And then she came around and began to listen. I think it's very important. Renunciation's important, detachment's important, dispassion is important. Weaning yourself off of attachment to sense objects is important. These are all yogic, Vedantic, Buddhistic kind of facets of spiritual life that if you find yourself lacking or devoid of, that's where you run afoul of birth, life, and death, and of karma, and of suffering. Even suffering that has no reason to be there, like with the rich. You're just going to find that objects, either one, can decay, two, they can get lost, three, you can get bored with them, four, they can get stolen. I mean, you go on looking at objects. Five, even science has proven that they're substanceless. There's no essence, there's no substance in them. There's an essence in them, I would say. That's Brahman behind them. But there's no substance to them. They're particles vibrating in a bit of a second, kind of emptiness.
Yeah,
so that's why Buddhists gave them up and called it shunyata, and the scientists saw that very same thing, but haven't given them up yet. I find that very odd, that you would find everything to be vibrating all the time with no substance to its middle, and still go on pursuing the outer tract. When you should use that as a clue, oh, I've gone the wrong direction here, or I've seen as far as I can outward. It's about time I check in with the kingdoms of heaven within, or with the Father's mansion with many chambers.
Yeah.
I mean, because they know about Christianity, some of them.
Well, you can hear the teachings and quibble with them, but it's been interesting for me to see some of these monks. They've given up, and I guess maybe when I was younger was thinking, how could anybody be happy giving up all these things? But they're glowing within.
Yeah.
So it's nice to have that model of someone who's given up what seems so alluring to us, but is still glowing with joy and life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Difference between a sannyasin in India and, say, maybe a street person here is that one has given up everything on purpose and is delighting in the austerity of owning nothing, and the others are without, devoid, suffering, wanting maybe, and getting the wrong end of the wrong end of the stick with society. Therefore, you have to. The monks then you find these monks willing to give up their bliss and go across to Darjeeling or to any plague or flood or famine-ridden place and give up their bliss and so forth in order to bring clothing and water filters and food to these people at their own risk of health and vitality, and to serve not people but to serve God and people.
Right.
That's how they make the distinction.
And it's nice to see that with somebody who's happy and glowing, as opposed to, I mean, it is a sacrifice, but it's a joyful sacrifice.
Yeah. Everything they do is on purpose.
Yeah.
Their austerity of giving up and their service is all on purpose.
It's like the arrow.
It's conscious.
The arrow.
It's like the arrow,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly.
Now, you also had some background in Buddhism, and I think you've had some time with Kala Rinpoche, a giant of 20th century Buddhism.
And got initiated by the Karmapa,
Yeah.
the previous Karmapa, who initiated both Lex Sixon and I, on the same day into the green Tara and the white Tara, which ends up to be a great experience and memory in my mind.
Yeah.
He did the two of us together privately, which is different than giving a group initiation. Gave us our own malas. I've still got my Tibetan malas with all the facets hanging off of them, and it was so in tune with Divine Mother Path of India that I had already been on. That it was just Divine Mother, green Tara, white Tara. There are even songwriters like Ram Prasad and Kamala Kanta in Bengal who, when they sing about the Mother in one of their songs, use those terms in conjunction with one another, as if they're the same goddess, which they are, Durga, Kali, and Tara. He uses those three all the time. So it's not like Buddhism is separate from India anyway, or ever was separate from India. It's all Indian Dharma. And even when you take it, to Japan, 32 generations in China, and Japan 64 generations later, roughly speaking, then you've got India there, and you have to take the Sanskrit and put it into Japanese. So Atman becomes Busho, or like we have to do here, put it into English. Your true nature, your divine nature is Atman.
Right. And you've told a humorous story of having the distinction of playing cello for the Karmapa while he was eating meatballs.
Noodles and meatballs, yes. I mean, you can't expect everyone to become vegetarian. An Eskimo, for instance, what would he eat?
Yes.
Snow peas?
Yeah.
Iceberg lettuce, we say as a joke. But basically, yes, these great beings are beyond any rules and regulations and can do what they want, and they're beyond the karma that accrues too. In fact, that's why they can teach you. There's tussles I've had with young students that think that they can teach the guru. They think that they know everything already, and it's not a good way to enter into the guru-disciple relationship. You really need to be humble. Tad vidhi pranipatena pariprasnena sevaya upadekshanti te jnana jnaninas tattva darshanaha, Krishna says in the Gita. That the student must approach the guru by prostrating, then serve them selflessly, and then, when they're ready, ask questions about the nature of divine reality. And then that's darshan, tattva. Then those beings will give you darshan, will give you initiation into the highest truth, is how you could say that in English. So, very important. And we start off most of our classes, Om Sahana Bhavatu, Sahano Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Kar. It really all means, may we not fight amongst each other, may we not criticize or find fault, may we work together to reach the goal. That's the whole purpose. It would be good for people in American politics right now to think in that way. For instance, backbiting, backstabbing, holding vendettas and revenge and smear tactics and all that. What is that? It's just, are you really in it for the highest good of humanity, or are you just in it for yourself?
Well, to complete the translation of that peace chant, may this talk inspire all beings everywhere.
Yes.
Thank you for this walk through your teachers and your teachings. It's been wonderful again, and hopefully we can do the fifth one soon.
Yes.
Okay.
So thank you
Thanks.
for prostrating, for serving selflessly, and for asking questions about the nature of reality,
Yes,
because
okay.
that is the result here.
Okay.
May all beings benefit by it. Jai.
Jai.